we're gonna go over why children need to strength train, and we're gonna start right now. We're going to go into the research of the effects of resistance training on academic outcomes in school-age youth, a systematic review and meta-analysis. And so basically the discussion around this paper comes down to two specific lines. If we look at the methods, okay, if we're looking at the specific methods of the paper, and this is from Katie Robinson, Nick Riley, Catherine Owen, all these individuals who then went in and they're analyzing 53 different studies. And the studies that they looked at basically came down to, were they analyzing school-age children? And then on top of that, were they actually using resistance-based training? Okay, so they wanted to see what exactly that has, what impact that has on the cognitive capability of a school-aged youth child. Okay, some of the big factors here is that if you're looking at, they have to be using school-aged children or school-aged youth when they're doing this study, 5 to 18 years old. Okay, so 5 years old to 18 years old. And then the second big one, they examined the effect of resistance training on academic outcomes. Okay, that's huge. They examined the effect of resistance training on academic outcomes. And so how do they define academic outcomes? You have to look at this and say, okay, cognitive function, academic achievement, and or on-task behavior in the classroom. So how are they able to stay focused? How well do they stay on task when they're in the classroom? From that top-down perspective, a pretty simple analysis of what we're looking for and why potentially or why not we should have individuals, specifically school-age youth, doing actual resistance-based training. And I even want to cover the risk of bias. Okay, so they looked at this, they said the risk of bias was assessed using the appropriate Cochrane risk of bias tools, funnel plots, and Egger's regression asymmetry tests. Okay, so these are tests that can be used to just check and make sure that there's no traditional bias going on. There's nothing that could hinder or actually impede upon this research. And when they looked at these 53 different studies, okay, so they can go in and they can find these specific studies in databases and say, okay, they're school-age youth, check. We're researching the cognitive patterns of school-age youth, check. Finally, are they using resistance-based training while they're analyzing school-age youth and while they're looking at cognitive patterns, check. That fits into the mold. Now we've got those 53 studies, 5 to 18 years old. And what they ended up finding is that participation in resistance-based training, okay, so 10 studies, there were 10 studies where it was just resistance-based training. They had a small positive effect on the overall cognitive, academic, and on-task behaviors. So all three of them. It was small, but it was positive and it was statistically significant. So if we're looking specifically at that statistical significance, okay, we're looking at had a small positive effect on the overall cognitive, academic, and on-task behaviors in school-age youth. The standardized mean difference, 0.19. That's a 95% confidence interval. Okay, so that's them saying it was small, but it was present and it needs to be brought into light. It's something that could take you from potentially being an 83% student, you know, a B- student, to now all of a sudden you're a B+ 90% student. It's small, but it will have a positive impact. Now that next aspect that they were looking at, okay, resistance training was more effective than concurrent training. Okay, the combination of resistance training and aerobic training. So now we're looking at these papers and we're saying, okay, if we have individuals 5 to 18 years old and they're doing lifting, they're doing strength training, and they're doing some aerobic work, and based off of this research, we're going to see that just doing resistance-based training has a more positive impact on the cognitive capability, on the on-task behavior, than if that individual is doing aerobic-based training and resistance-based training, okay? And there could be a couple different factors along those lines that impacts that, but traditional strength training tends to have a better positive impact on cognition. And then finally, we're looking at an additional 43 studies that examine the association between muscular fitness and cognition or academic achievement. So if we have these 5 to 18-year-old children and they have healthy muscular fitness, meaning they have more lean muscle mass, okay, you tend to have more lean muscle mass. What does that mean based off of your academic performance? And that brings us to yielding a positive relationship, 0.13, 95% confidence interval. So now we're looking at this and we're going, okay, so what does this mean, right? Does this mean that we absolutely have to lift weights as a 5-year-old to an 18-year-old to be smart? No, it doesn't mean that at all. But it does mean if you have an individual, if you have a child who potentially is struggling with staying on task, or maybe they're just a child who could be improving just slightly more, they could have a little bit more motivation, or maybe they could focus on something outside of school and that could in turn help them with some type of academic stimulation. What ends up happening is that if we get children to start resistance-based training, now they start to learn outside behaviors that they then can apply to that educational standard. And another big factor here is that oftentimes, outside of the muscular fitness aspect and the fact that that did lead to better academic performance, is that when we're lifting weights or when we're doing resistance-based training, we often see an improvement in discipline and focus. Here at Garage Strength, when we have athletes that come in the door, okay, let's say we've got somebody who's 12 years old, 15 years old, whatever, they come in and they want to start lifting weights. Oftentimes, without even being prompted from parents, we will have parents come back 6 months later, 9 months later and say, hey, I know little Johnny's gotten bigger. I know little, Sophie's gotten a lot stronger. She's gotten more explosive, but I want to tell you another aspect. She's gotten way more organized with her time. He's taken way more priority on his nutrition. He gets to bed on time because he knows he has to lift the next day. So all of these other factors start to play into the success of the individual. And a lot of it comes from that external feedback that they're getting from resistance-based training. It's something that oftentimes we actually don't think of because it's happening outside the gym. But if we're understanding as coaches the positive impact that we can have on children with discipline, with prioritizing their schedule, now that in turn is going to leak over into that academic realm. Another big factor that I think often goes by the wayside is that when you're dealing with a non-school setting, okay, so you come into the gym here at Garage Strength or you're using Peak Strength, you download Peak Strength at peakstrength.app, the Google Play Store or the Apple iOS Store, and you want your child to get inside of this resistance-based program, they have to follow instructions. So in Peak Strength, the app has to tell you how to do this. You have to watch a video to execute a specific movement pattern. Here at Garage Strength, you're learning how to do a clean or a snatch or a back squat or a walking lunge, whatever that is. Now you're getting instruction in something that tends to be physical, and you have to think about neural coordination. You have to think about paying attention a little bit differently, being more aware of other cues. And that in turn can lead to a greater cognitive performance because now you're learning how to coordinate your body and take instruction at the exact same time, which again leaks over into the educational realm. So where should children and parents start? And I recommend, when we have athletes come in the door here, we have a developmental program. Train 1 to 2 days a week. Just train 1 to 2 days a week for 4 to 8 weeks. Let's see where you're at. Let's see how you develop. Let's see how the athlete can handle instruction. Let's see how they can handle the stress of being uncomfortable, getting the burn in their quads, whatever that might be. Let's just see what happens. After those 4 to 8 weeks, then you can increase it. Maybe it's 2 days a week or 3 days a week that you build into it. And then slowly you keep adding days. You get to 4 or 5 days a week. And now this kid prioritizes that physical fitness. They prioritize that muscular fitness, which we then have seen based off of the effects of resistance training on academic outcomes in school-age youth, that in turn their grades should, in theory, improve. And then finally, I wanted to throw in this anecdotal piece. When my dad first put gym in our garage, so we had this old pole building, and he's like, yeah, I'll get you a squat rack and a bench, and we'll put it out there. When we first didn't use it, he would say, the weights aren't gonna lift themselves, but then on top of that, over a long period of time, once we showed that we were committed to doing the resistance training, he would actually be like, hey, you're like 45 minutes, 60 minutes before you're gonna do your homework. Why don't you just go out and lift? Go out and lift for like 45 minutes. And then what ends up happening is we would go out and lift, my brother and I, okay, and we would actually be stimulated. We'd have more blood flow. We'd start to feel really good. After you get a good workout and you're like, yeah, I feel strong. I've got more confidence. And then we would go do our homework. But I think ultimately with children, you've just got to be supportive. You've got to teach them to be active. You got to teach them to exercise. You have to help them, instruct them, and just be supportive. You're there as their parent, you're there as being supportive, and you're there to foster them to have an optimal situation of growth. And I think that's all we can ask for as parents, as coaches. Look at different things that somebody might be struggling with. Recognize that resistance-based training can help cognitive capability, and ultimately just being active and doing academic work is absolutely phenomenal for that lifelong positive existence. If you guys need help with your programming, head over to peakstrength.app, the Google Play Store, the Apple iOS Store, because remember, freaks, if you want to become a champion, you've always got to cultivate your power. Peace.